Welcome to the Outsmart Burnout podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Zaria Rubin, a functional medicine doctor, an international speaker, and a burnout badass because I've been there myself. After walking away from my own high-stress medical career, I discovered how to break free from burnout to reclaim my passion, purpose, and joy. And now I'm here to help you do the same. From science-backed tips to time-saving hacks, and hopefully some aha moments that just might change your life. So sit back, relax, and let's do this. Welcome back to the Outsmart Burnout podcast. Today, I'm joined by Laura Sgro, a licensed anxiety and trauma therapist, neurodivergence advocate, and founder of Out of the Woods Therapy. Laura specializes in working with anxious people pleasers, high achievers, and neurodivergent adults who are ready to heal and grow. Through a mix of EMDR, brain spotting, internal family systems therapy, and a radical commitment to authenticity and inclusivity, Laura creates spaces where clients don't have to hold it all together. So if you have ever felt like you were too much or not enough, then this conversation is for you. Welcome to the show. It's such a treat. And
Yeah.
I feel like we have so many different things that we could talk about because I feel like everything that you do, all of the clients that you serve, there's pretty much 100% overlap with all the women that I serve and work with as well. And I would love to dive
Yes.
into that. And I think we're going to touch on neurodivergence and burnout. We're going to definitely touch on trauma and burnout, anxiety and burnout, all the things.
Yeah.
But I always like to start at the beginning and ask my guests, what drew you to the current career and field that you are in? So what made you decide to be a therapist in the first place?
Yeah. It's a fun question for me because I had a lot of side quests to get here
I'm the
back in
queen of
the
side
day.
quests.
Yeah. This was not what I thought I'd be doing, 20 years ago, but here we are and I love it. I really thought I wanted to be like a criminal minds kind of person. That's like initially what I went to school for, to do some like criminal profiling, Jodie Foster stuff, and then very quickly realized that was not for me. I ended up getting an internship in undergrad where I was working with survivors of domestic violence, survivors of sexual assault, and realized that, wow, I really love doing this kind of work. Like helping people survive and thrive through really traumatic experiences to find themselves on the other side of that. And so that sort of spearheaded everything else. I decided to, after school, work at some nonprofits doing that work. And then pretty quickly realized, no, I want to do like the meat and potatoes, the really deep one-on-one work with people. So I went back to grad school to be a therapist. And that's how I got here, over time, just really seeing the way that anxiety, trauma can impact people and really impacts everybody to some degree. We all have a little bit of that, right? I don't think I've had a single client come in who hasn't experienced some sort of anxiety or burnout in their lives. And so, really wanting to help people get through that experience. And my own journey with neurodivergence kind of opened up that world for me too. And so now I work with a lot of folks who are realizing later in life that that might be something that they're navigating as well.
Yeah, so that is a really interesting point of conversation. So you describe yourself as a neurodivergent. You're a late in life ADHD diagnosis, right?
Yes, in my
So
30s.
talk to us a little bit more about that and how that has
Yeah.
informed your therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting because I feel like a lot of people who experience neurodivergence, whether that's ADHD, autism, high sensitivity, whatever it might be, often get told that message: I'm too much, I'm not enough, I'm lazy, I'm not doing things right. Why is this so much easier for other people? There's just constant narratives that make us feel inadequate or that make us feel like we're doing something wrong. And we're not doing anything wrong, right? It's we're trying to navigate a world that's not necessarily set up for our brain, or perhaps we don't even have the knowledge of what our brain needs. And so when I got my ADHD diagnosis, the first thing I remember thinking was, oh, that makes sense. That like really opened my eyes to a lot of the things that I was experiencing. And the second thing I remember thinking is, oh my gosh, it's not just me. I don't have to feel all of this shame. And I remember the shame component being a huge part of my experience through life and still comes up, of course. I'm only human. And so in my therapy practice now, whether people come in knowing or self-identifying or formally being diagnosed with some kind of neurodivergence, or they have no idea that that's a thing and it's something that I see along the way of our work together, it's really been great exploring that journey because there's so much destigmatizing and validating that can come with recognizing, okay, this makes sense. My brain's not broken. My brain doesn't need to be fixed. I just need to figure out what it needs and then move through life accordingly. And I make it sound very simple. Of course, it's not always simple, but I just really love that component of it. Like, nothing's wrong with you.
Yeah, I think especially ADHD, there's a lot of stigma attached to that because you
Yeah.
might have been chastised a lot as a kid. Like,
Yeah.
why are you always losing things? And what's wrong
Yeah.
with you? Or why can't you remember these important,
Yeah, you
appointments
must
or
not care enough, when you forget something that's like a friend's birthday or something, it can really impact your social relationships too. Emotional dysregulation is a huge part of this and of executive dysfunction. And that can happen a lot in, intimate relationships. So it really shows up in all parts of life. And of course, that, the neurodivergent experience of burnout is also a very kind of specific thing that can happen too and really impact people even more deeply than just the typical kind of burnout that we hear about.
okay, well, I want to dive into that. But I think before we do, I feel like neurodivergence is one of those buzzwords that we are
Mhm.
hearing all the time these days. And it seems like everybody is neurodivergent, or so people say, or so TikTok and the internet says. Can you give us just a little bit of a background on is there such thing as neurotypical and what is neurodivergent? Is everybody normal or is everybody weird or
Right,
what's the
right.
scoop?
Yeah. So I'm going to preface this by saying some of this is definitely like mixed in with my own sort of opinion and beliefs. I'm not a neuropsychologist, and so I can't speak to sort of the formalized research there. But what I can say is the reason why so many people are recognizing these traits in themselves is because we're expanding our knowledge of what neurodivergence actually is. Right. And so I think a long time ago, we had this very narrow view of like using autism as an example, right? Our knowledge of autism has really expanded over the years. Our knowledge of ADHD has really expanded. It's not just the little boy bouncing off the walls in school anymore, like, especially in women, it looks very, very
Mhm.
different. So I think the way that I sort of see this and the path that I choose to take around this, especially when I'm trying to destigmatize this and normalize this for clients, is I'm a big believer that we all just have kind of different types of brains. And what we've seen as quote unquote neurotypical is like one type of brain, right? And that's the type that societally we've embraced and built our world around. Someone with ADHD maybe just has a different type of brain. Someone with autism or ADHD has a different type of brain. So I think of it more as like differences in neurotypes versus like I don't even really like to call ADHD attention deficit hyperactivity activity disorder because it's not a disorder and I don't think it's a deficit. So even in how we label some of these things, I don't think accurately describes what the situation is. And so I just think we're expanding the way that we're thinking about this. And for me, it comes down to accommodations. What does my brain need? What does your brain need? How do we move through the world given that?
I love that. And I love the concept of just different neurotypes.
Hmm.
And there isn't like normal and then deviant,
Right.
even though that's how it's
Exactly.
been characterized in, kind of mainstream society, especially with the neurotypical being the norm. And that's kind of what capitalism, patriarchy, what. So now I would love to then dive into what you were just touching on, which is neurodivergence and burnout and how that one contributes to the other and how being a neurodivergent person in a neurotypical world and having to overfunction or having to mask, etc., and
Yeah.
how that can contribute to the whole burnout picture.
Yeah. So I view burnout in general, however we're contextualizing it, as kind of like a nervous system thing. So our nervous system is communicating to us maybe signals of I can't, this is a lot. We can't maybe handle this way. We need to do something different. We need more resources, whatever, whatever. And when we don't listen to those cues or when we can't listen to those cues, we go into burnout. And so thinking about the nervous system of a neurodivergent person, there's even more layers there. So I'm thinking, like you said, to masking, for example, when you're chronically masking everywhere you go, when you're hyperfixating on, oh, am I saying the right things? Are people perceiving me correctly? Am I,
Yeah,
doing
just
anything?
to define masking if there are any listeners who
Yeah.
are not totally familiar with what that is, or they've heard of it, but they don't exactly know what it means.
Yeah, great call. So,
Yeah.
masking is typically the process of changing your behavior or trying to, in some ways, make yourself smaller or to ultimately adapt to your environment that you view as like neurotypical. So, it's trying to adapt to a neurotypical world. And a lot of times that might look like, not being authentic in the way that you're speaking to people, maybe not feeling comfortable or like you're able to express yourself. For a lot of people, it's maybe not doing any kind of stimming behaviors, which is self stimulation behaviors like fidgeting or other things to help get energy out or to help self regulate. So it might be avoiding those kinds of things, which are very helpful for a neurodivergent person because you're worried about how you might be perceived. So masking behaviors can be a lot of different things, but ultimately it's just the practice of feeling the pressure to hide these aspects of yourself or not or to perform like a neurotypical person essentially.
I sort of call it the square peg, round hole
Yes, it's
syndrome. And
totally
like,
that.
I just, my whole life, it was like hammer, hammer, hammer. And it's exhausting. It's painful. It's constricting. You start to question, who you really are anyway, because you've
Right.
spent so much time just trying to adapt and fit in and get people to like you. And then, that leads into the whole fawning behavior, which I'm sure we'll
100.
get to. Yeah. So interesting. So, yeah. So that can definitely contribute to neurodivergent burnout. And maybe some other ways that neurodivergence takes a toll on us?
Yeah. So again, especially with like ADHD, but this can also be true for folks with other types of neurodivergence, there's a lot of emotional dysregulation that can happen. So because neurodivergent people often process the world differently, and by that I really mean like more deeply. They're processing cues very intensely. They're feeling very intensely. And these aren't bad things. They're just, parts of this neurotype. So because you're experiencing the world very intensely, that's going to lead to you having big emotions potentially. That's going to lead to you having a lot of feedback about your surroundings and your stimuli. And so as a result, that can lead to emotional dysregulation. That can lead to you feeling really overwhelmed. So I find that for myself, especially, but I've seen this a lot in my work, neurodivergent burnout often happens through just chronic overwhelm, just being overstimulated either by sensory components in your environment or by mental load and not knowing where to start and getting stuck and feeling overwhelmed by all the things you have to do because some of these executive functions are maybe a little bit harder or don't come as naturally or just we process them differently and we're not necessarily taught to do that. We're not taught what accommodations we might need to do that, so we're still trying to do it in this neurotypical way. That's gonna lead to our nervous systems feeling totally overwhelmed.
This is so true. As someone who really just is bothered by fluorescent lights and
Yeah.
noise and they like,
Yes.
every office situation, working in a hospital, my God, the
No, I bet.
smells, the overhead lights, the lack of daylight, the constant overstimulation with the noise in like an ICU is not a quiet place. There's just like so many
Yeah.
machines and things going off, alarms constantly. I mean, your nervous system is just on high alert at all times
Right.
as a person, with a trauma history or undiagnosed trauma history right
Right,
here.
and then you add in those social dynamics of masking and other things, and then boom, you've got this recipe
Mhm.
for just, like, your body not feeling good at all.
Completely. So this is something that I really want to touch on. I'm so excited to have you here is that how trauma or a history of childhood trauma, complex PTSD can often look like ADHD.
Mhm.
And yet it's different. But yet there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of people say, like, oh, I think maybe I have ADHD. And I have thought that myself too. But then I thought, no, you know what? I never had any of the signs and symptoms, but I definitely have trauma. And the end result can certainly look similar. And then you add in perimenopause to the mix
Yeah.
and all bets are off. So talk to us
Right.
a bit about that beautiful
Yeah,
combination
you're
of
you're talking about
factors.
so many things here, right? So we've got sort of trauma, which is like how our brain interprets and processes experiences that we've been through. Because something that you feel is traumatic, someone else could go through something similar, and they maybe don't feel the same way. And so trauma isn't like this event is trauma. It's the way that we respond to the event or the way that our brain processes the event that makes
Okay.
it trauma.
This is gold. Thank you for saying this because I also wanted to take a step back and define trauma because my goodness,
Yeah.
we hear the words trauma informed all day long,
Yep.
traumatic triggers all day
Hmm.
long on social media. And I feel like it's almost getting overused on the one hand. On the other hand, I'm very glad that there's more
Right.
awareness and
It's always
attention
both.
being drawn to it. And I think that when I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, I thought, well, that's impossible. I was never in a war zone. I was never like physically, sexually abused. So I can't have trauma.
Yeah. So some of those things that you're talking about right there in the therapy field, we call those like big T traumas. And I would say a lot of people come in thinking that that's the only type of trauma you can have. Or, maybe there's a part of them consciously or unconsciously that recognizes that they've experienced something traumatic, but they're like, well, this shouldn't bother me because it's not as quote unquote big as some of those other things. And yet people can experience a single small T trauma or a prolonged series of little T traumas. And it's really not about like what the event is, it's about how your system processes it. And that is so dependent on a million different things, right? If you have a really strong support system and you grew up with really loving attachment figures, you might have a little bit more resilience to handle some of these traumatic experiences and not be as impacted by them or impacted in the same way. Someone without those experiences, someone who maybe has experienced chronic traumatic events since they were really young, may not be able to process that the same way. So it really is individual. I really want anyone listening to just recognize that and know that there's no shame in experiencing traumatic symptoms or feeling like something you've been through is traumatic, even if it's not a big T trauma. Like anything can be
Yes.
trauma if it's been painful for you.
And you shouldn't ever have to justify that to anybody. And you are
That's right.
not obligated to have to explain or tell the story of your trauma when people ask. You were
Yeah.
traumatized by what? No offense, but that's
Your life
literally
is
what
so good.
what
Ugh.
people have said to me. Like,
Oh my goodness. I'm so
I'm
sorry.
yeah, you have no idea. But so,
Wow.
and then I feel like that can manifest as a sort of an ADHD like brain in some
Yes.
ways because of the executive function interruptions.
Totally. Well, exactly. You just said it right there. So the way that I'm going to try to keep this very
For
brief
our
because I know
non-neurologist, non-therapist listeners.
we have very limited time here, so I'm not going to go all crazy with the biology here. But long story short, like when you have when you experience anything, your brain stores it in sort of like a filing cabinet, and it gets stored away, and then you can come back to it when you need it. Great, that's normal functional memory consolidation. When you experience a trauma, it doesn't happen like that. Trauma literally changes the wiring of your brain. And so this memory or this experience is not getting filed away perfectly in a filing cabinet, it's being fragmented. So certain smells get put in one part of your brain. You might have certain images or thoughts or beliefs about yourself. And this is all being done by the limbic system in your brain, your amygdala, which is your emotion system. That's the very primitive part of our brain. That's where our fight or flight systems come from way back in the day is our amygdala. And so we're not
The
operating
lizard brain
the
that we talk
lizard
about.
brain. Exactly. So you're not operating from your logical brain when you're, navigating trauma. It's just lizard brain. So what happens then is that when you experience certain situations, certain triggers, I should say, certain smells, certain images, certain reminders, certain cues, that lizard brain, that amygdala goes on high alert. And so you might experience a lot of emotional dysregulation. That can look a lot like ADHD, where there's a trigger and then suddenly you have this reaction that maybe feels disproportionate to what the situation is. But one of these is caused by, this traumatic experience that's unprocessed and is not properly consolidated in your brain. And then the other is caused by just a different, again, different neurotype, different wiring in your brain. And, we can approach them somewhat similarly in terms of skills, but addressing the origins is going to be very different. Whereas trauma is something that through trauma work we can heal and work on. We're not quote unquote healing or fixing an ADHD brain. There's nothing to fix there. We're just going to
Right.
be teaching different skills and accommodations so that you have more control over those reactions.
Yeah, it's so helpful. Thank you. And I feel like the ADHD brain, the trauma brain, and then the burnout brain can
Mhm.
also all look familiar in terms of a certain stuckness
Yes.
that happens and an inability to, get shit done.
Yeah. So and again, this is all related back to the nervous system, right? So when you experience trauma, your nervous system's in overdrive. Either you go way into your sympathetic nervous system where you're super hyper aroused and you're stuck on, or you go into your shutdown and collapse. You're so overwhelmed, you can't function, you're stuck in off. And ADHD burnout can also look like that. And so can, sort of typical regular burnout when you're having so many things that are overwhelming you and you're stuck in this chronic burnout, you might find yourself in either sympathetic or in that shutdown state. So it really is one and one with the nervous system.
Yeah. Okay. Now we're going to get deep into the weeds. So
Yeah.
you mentioned like there's sort of these two different states of you're in this hyperarousal state. That's when you're really on and everything is in overdrive. So we think of that as like the fight or flight state, right?
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
just that's when you're, you know, getting into it with people, you're
Yeah,
confronting,
I would say it's like you're mobilized, right? So
you're
you're
mobilized.
mobilized
Okay.
either to fight or to flee.
Yeah, or you're like running from the situation or you're
Correct. Yeah.
avoiding. Whereas the shutdown state or the freeze state that we talk about a
Mhm.
lot, that is when you're just kind of like everything is very
Yeah.
low in
You're
terms of fear.
immobilized.
You're immobilized. You're literally kind of playing dead.
Yes,
And
exactly.
these are all different ways to respond to threat and to predators, right? Like quote unquote predators. We're not literally being chased by saber-toothed tigers. I call them paper tigers when I
I
give
love
my
that.
talks that like often it's something that happens on social media or it's a conversation or they're
Yeah,
not real physical threats, but they're threats all the same and our brain perceives them in a very similar way. And
exactly.
then we come to another less often talked about state, which is the fawn state or the people pleasing state. And I know that you help a lot of people in your practice, people with anxiety, people who are perfectionists, people pleasers.
Yeah.
Let's dive into that a little bit and talk about the fawn state.
Yeah, it's so interesting when we think about the nervous system, like I do categorize it in a couple of different states. The one that I would add here just for anyone listening, this comes from polyvagal theory by Stephen Porges, is what he calls the ventral vagal state, which is our calm and regulated state.
Right. I was like, I've left out the good normal state. I've only talked about the pathological states, but
For
yes,
people to know that there is a state
there
they can
is
be
a
in
state.
that's not
Yes. Yes.
challenging.
Yes.
So
Attention, listeners. You do not have to either choose between fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Those are the four trauma reactions or the four
right.
reactions to. But then the fifth one, yes, is the beautiful. This is the state that we're trying to achieve, which is the
Yes.
calm, regulated, balanced state. And this is what
Yeah.
I talk about in a lot of my talks when I talk
Yeah.
about chronic stress and stress addiction and nervous system overload. And like, that's what we're aiming for. We can't always be there. We can't always be in the calm, regulated state, but we sure need to know how to get back there.
Exactly, and that's what I always tell folks too, is like the
And
goal isn't to be there 100%, it's to be able to kind of move in and out of it with more ease and more
yes.
regulation.
And from
So,
what I've read, and I love polyvagal theory, I'm obsessed
yeah,
with it. I want to
me
get
too.
trained in it someday. But that
It's
fawn
great.
is kind of this weird intersection between multiple different states.
Yes,
And it's got little elements of, dorsal vagal, ventral vagal, sympathetic, overdrive, shut
all of
down,
it.
all of it. And so tell us about fawn and how people
Yeah,
pleasing can be a sign of anxiety, burnout, all the things,
yeah.
and what to
So
do about it.
I think a lot of folks maybe feel can get misled because when you're people pleasing, you're kind of leaning into connection in a way. And so you might think, oh, I'm in ventral vagal. I'm calm and I'm regulated because I'm like reaching out to my community for co regulation.
And you get a lot of
Except,
positive feedback for being a
yes,
people pleaser.
yes, exactly. So it can feel like it's in that state, but where is that behavior coming from? And I always like to use this example where, there's going to be times where someone is maybe asking something of you and you maybe don't want to do it, but you say yes because that's part of the, nature of having meaningful relationships with people. but that should be kind of the exception. And that should be something that is intentional, not something you're doing, maybe not the exception, but it should definitely be intentional, not something you're doing on default, which is what people pleasing and fawning really is. It's a default response, and you're not taking your own needs into consideration. So you want to be able to, weigh the needs of the person that you care about that's asking you to do something with the needs of yourself and be able to make an intentional choice about that.
And
And
that's
most
really a
people who are,
boundaries thing too, right?
yeah,
It's like knowing your boundaries, which we often don't know, knowing your
right.
capacity, which is something I've been focusing on recently, is if you
Yes.
don't know your capacity and you're constantly exceeding it by saying yes to everything and everyone else, you're going to
Yeah.
burn out.
You're going to burn
And then
out.
knowing how to enforce those
Yeah.
boundaries, which is a
It's
whole
like
other
multiple
thing.
skills here, right? And it's hard. It's like, okay, cool. I know what my boundaries are now. And then I maybe don't know how to enforce them yet. And so it's all a process. But so a lot of people will fawn thinking that they're in that regulated state. And what I work a lot with folks on is like, okay, like what was the decision making process around this? Like what was your nervous system telling you, right? Because I'm a big nervous system nerd. What were some of the thoughts going on in your head? And that's usually where I can pick out cues of anxiety or trauma responses, especially if I know the person's history. Like, oh, that sounds a lot like when this thing happened and this is how you learn to survive. Or, oh, your body's having this reaction. I wonder if that's anxiety. So, really, fawning is more of a sympathetic response or a dorsal shutdown response because it's like, I don't know what else to do except for this. This is my default. I'm just going to do it and not acknowledge my own self here. I agree with you. It's really like all the different ones in a way.
If I'm playing dead and you're about to eat me, maybe I can get you to like me.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it sounds funny when you put it like that, but that is sort of
It's
an
kind of it,
over
right?
yeah, it's kind of
Yeah, it's
it.
yeah.
A little oversimplified, but like that but
Sure.
that is what the brain is sort of doing. It's negotiating, right? It's negotiating for ultimately survival. And like you said, there's no saber-toothed tiger out there, but your brain thinks that there is. Our brains, our lizard brains have not evolved to the point yet where it's able to distinguish tiger versus email. So, and really when you have these repeated experiences of, these challenging or traumatic things happening, through a process called neuroception, your brain learns to expect those bad outcomes. And so it responds to similar things in those similar ways. So even if you can kind of like not logically know that something's different, your nervous system is still using that predictive pattern recognition.
Ooh, tell us more about this. Dive more into this and the neuroception and how we
Yeah.
create these default operating systems and patterns.
Yeah, so neuroception's a fancy word, but it basically just means, yeah, this pattern recognition of like how we view the world around us. So neuroception is like my nervous system's constantly interpreting cues from my environment. It's constantly looking at external information as well as internal information from my body and my thoughts, and it's making split decisions below my conscious awareness about whether I'm safe or not. At the core of it, it comes down to that. Am I safe? Am I not safe? If it thinks that I'm not safe, it's going to go into either sympathetic nervous system or dorsal vagal shutdown. And so over time, like let's use someone as an example who maybe has had a lot of like ruptured attachment experiences. Maybe their family life was tough as a kid and then they had maybe just not satisfying relationships as an adult. And so over time, they may learn that like opening up and connecting with people is not safe. And so they respond in ways, even if they really want this thing, even if they really want a deep and loving connection, their nervous systems maybe will act in ways that are counterintuitive to that or counterproductive to that because it doesn't feel like connection is safe. Because that's what it's learned over time. So
Ooh,
yeah, and don't worry, everyone. There are ways to challenge that and ways to break that cycle. But the first step is recognizing that that's what it is.
yeah. Well, you just read my mind, and I was going to say that let's talk a little bit about for people who are listening and they're like, "Gosh, I recognize myself. I'm super
Hmm.
anxious. I'm a people pleaser. I'm neurodivergent. I'm totally burnt out. I've got a trauma history. What are some things that I can do aside from, of course, seeing a therapist and seeing a trauma therapist and maybe doing some of these amazing techniques that you offer, like EMDR, brain spotting, etc., and different types of therapy? What are some ways that we can help try to activate that ventral vagal state, that calm, regulated state more often? I mean, of course, I have my toolkit and my ideas, but I'd love to
Yeah.
hear from you as to what you would suggest as a first step for people.
Yeah. I don't think we're going to like this first step because it's acceptance. It's acceptance that burnout means something has to change. And I've seen a lot of resistance around that. And I've experienced,
Girlfriend, it's
yeah.
my tagline of my podcast
Yeah, I know it is, isn't it? That's
that
so funny.
burnout is not your destiny, it's your wake-up call.
Yeah. And I think a lot of folks are like, yeah, I know, but like, I don't know that I'm ready to change that. So it really comes down to acceptance. Your nervous system is communicating with you. That's what burnout is. So if you're recognizing these symptoms, the translation of that is, okay, I have to put myself first in some ways. So there's a lot of different ways we can regulate the nervous system, and I'm going to kind of go against the grain here and say that it's not just about being calm. It's about responding to the state that you're in. So if you're in sympathetic nervous system, if you're chronically in this fight or flight, very mobilized, very like heightened emotional responses, yeah, we're going to want to calm some of those responses and downregulate in order to get you back to equilibrium. But if you're in dorsal shutdown, you don't need to be calm, right? You actually need to upregulate and mobilize a little bit more. And so I would say that the starting place is to start mapping your nervous system cues. When do you feel safe? When do you feel connected? Notice what that feels like in your body. Notice the thoughts and the beliefs that you have about yourself when you're in that state. When you're in sympathetic or dorsal, same thing. How do you know? What are the cues? What is your body communicating to you? What are the messages you're telling yourself? Because once you know when you're going through different states, you can then find resources, and we can talk about some of those here too, to actually address what your nervous system needs in that particular state.
Yeah, I would love to hear a little bit more about sort of state-based
Mhm.
resources for people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm also going to include ventral here. Like if you're regulated, great. And we also want to keep practicing things so that you can use those tools to get back to regulation when needed. And so the big piece of ventral vagal and regulation there is connection. So it can be as simple as eye contact with somebody. It can be as simple as, when you're like at the coffee shop, you give that little like half smile to people, like just human connection there, or connection with pets. We were just gushing over your furry animals earlier before we started recording, and like that's co-regulation, right? So really like leaning into those resources too. But if you're in sympathetic, if you're really mobilized and you're in this heightened fight or flight state, we do want to bring that down. And I always think of those kinds of emotions as energy. There's a lot of energy that needs to be moved. And so how do we discharge some of that? So if you've ever noticed on National Geographic, for example, like when an animal is being chased by a lion and they manage to survive, you will see that animal after, like literally shaking it off. They're completing the stress cycle. And so, it would be a whole other side quest here to talk about like the stress cycle and everything there. But that is in some ways part of what burnout is too, is we got to figure out like how to finish that stress cycle and release it. So I always think of things like movement. I don't mean intense exercise, although that's great if that works for you, but it can be anything from shaking or dancing or swaying or, maybe quicker breath work here. Like if we're inhaling, make sure you're doing a long exhale, longer than your inhale. That's going to regulate and activate the parasympathetic nervous system. So when you need to downregulate, think of things that are going to release, discharge, calm. Those are the words that come to my head. And then I can go into dorsal too. Okay, and so with dorsal, I would just say here again, you're shut down, you're immobilized. Everything is going to feel hard. And recognizing that too. So if you're someone who like your overwhelm looks like, oh, all I can do is like lay on the couch and scroll because that's all I have energy for, then we want to do movement as well, but it's going to be different. The goal here isn't discharging. The goal here again is like to mobilize a little bit. So that might be like a pillow that you squeeze, right? That might be anything that's going to be bringing you to the present moment. Because when you're in dorsal, you might be a little bit dissociated too. So you want to ground in the present. And so I like to use a lot of sensory stuff with dorsal. So it could be like, again, touching things. Sense of touch is really great here. Something that can be really helpful is like sucking on a sour candy or or eating spicy food. Silly as it sounds, it really like can wake up your system a little bit. That I guess that's the word that's maybe coming to my mind here is we want to wake up the system and get you kind of to some sort of baseline so that you can then do what you need to do there to feel better.
Well, this was actually a perfect lead into my next question
Yeah,
because we have so much in common. And you
I love it.
mentioned, yeah, no, from things as silly as like karaoke to the furry animals to my next question, which is when you're immobilized on the couch and all you can do is doom scroll. And currently, where we are at
Yeah,
in society, in our political reality, we are all so burned out, and yet we want to stay engaged. We want to stay informed. We want to stay mobilized. What do we tell people who, at this moment in time, feel completely burned out by the news cycle? Because our nervous systems, guess what? We're not meant to handle this level of
yeah,
assault. And yet, we want to keep fighting for a
yeah,
better future and for all of the marginalized communities and people who are
absolutely.
under attack right now. What are you telling people? Because I bet there are a lot of people coming to your office right now with this
Yeah.
question.
So, number one, what I'm telling people is same, dude. Like, I'm right there with you.
Same.
Humanizing it
Yeah.
is really what I'm getting at, right? Like, again, community, co-regulation here, just holding space for that and sharing that space and being, especially in my role, like being honest about it. Like, I'm not one of those blank slate therapists that's like, what does it mean to you to know what my political affiliation is? No, like
No.
I'm gonna be
Yeah.
straight up about where I'm at this point in
Yeah.
time, you know what I mean? So being real with people is a form of co-regulation, whether that's your therapist, whether that's your community. That's why these protests are really important because it reminds you that you're not alone in feeling this way, which is the goal that the other side is going after. So that's one piece. Another piece is to really be honest with yourself about what is enough to stay informed. And is social media the best way to stay informed? So for example, there's a newsletter I really love called Betches, and they do a daily newsletter that talks about the news in kind of like a entertaining way, but there's links if you want to know more about each of these stories, but I can kind of get a sense of, this is just one that I like and there's plenty, but you get a sense of kind of what's going on without having to be inundated by social media and AI videos and maybe not AI videos that are really disturbing. And so some of that stuff is important for us to see, especially if we're in positions of privilege. Absolutely. And knowing you, like you said earlier, knowing your capacity and knowing your line and recognizing that today I might be able to handle a little bit more than I did yesterday or than I will tomorrow. And so a lot of people feel pressure to just constantly consume this content because they should. And my question to them would be like, what's good enough for you to be informed and active? And maybe there's something there that you can adjust. I'm a therapist, but I promise I'm just human. Just
Right.
trying to live this life. One thing I would love to touch on too around this is like recognizing that when you feel things, that's not bad. So we get a lot of language around like, oh, I feel angry, whatever, whatever. I need to like not feel that way. I need to again go back into calm. That's not our goal. Please feel, especially when it comes to current events and the sociopolitical climate and fascism and all these things. Like, please feel, please have the rage and
Yes.
recognize that the problem is not the emotion. It's what are we doing with that emotion?
Stay human.
Yes,
Stay human.
it's
Do not lose
crucial.
your humanity.
Crucial. That being said, though, know your limits, right? If your system is overwhelmed with these feelings, what are some outlets you can explore for that? What are some, again, ways you can discharge some of this energy, not to get rid of it, but in order to function in a way that makes more sense for you? So we want to hold space for our feelings. It's very therapist of me to say, but also not get stuck in them. But yeah, at the core of it, you don't want to lose your humanity ever. So be angry and be sad and be all of these things. And that's not the enemy. We just wanna make sure that we utilize those feelings in a way that's still functional.
Beautiful. I love this. This has been such an amazing conversation.
I know, I feel like we
So
could keep talking for
inspiring, so
hours.
empowering. We could. I have a little bit of a lightning round segment here
Ooh,
where I ask you a couple of quick questions and you answer and we see where it takes us. And then
okay.
we'll wrap up. So, the one thing that most people misunderstand about therapy.
I'm not just here to listen and nod my head at you, and I'm definitely not here to tell you what to do. I will challenge you when necessary. I will call out patterns that I see. I will do it gently, I promise. But my role here is as your collaborator and to guide you. I am not here to control you. I'm not here to tell you what's best. You are the expert on your life, and I will meet you there.
Love it. What is a book or resource that you recommend to a lot of your clients that you could recommend to us?
Well, I'm sure your audience has heard of the book Burnout by the Nagoski
The
sisters.
Nagoski sisters, when you mentioned the completing the stress cycle, I was like,
Yep, yep, yep. That's a
love
great
that
one.
book. It's a great one.
Otherwise, I would say one book I always recommend to people for who this resonates with would be Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. That is a great read. It's by Lindsay Gibson. If
On my
you
list.
grew up in a dysfunctional or just difficult home, it can be really helpful for people.
Asking for a friend.
I recommend it to everybody I know, client, friend, doesn't
Uh,
matter who, read the book.
it's on my list.
Yeah.
Okay, and then what would you tell your younger self just starting therapy?
Oh my gosh. Like therapy as a client,
Mm.
advocate for what you need. I would say that's really hard to do, especially because a lot of times folks think that, traditionally there's been a power dynamic in therapy. And that, again, is not how I practice. I come in with a clinical toolbox, but again, you're still the expert on your life. And I would never want my younger self to feel like she couldn't ask for what she needed, especially in a space where she's here to heal and grow and learn. And therapy's supposed to be your space. So I always encourage my clients to give me feedback or to ask for something different if they need it. And when appropriate, I always help them refer out if that's the case. But a lot of times it's just, oh, cool, I'll just adjust if this isn't helpful for you. And that's totally okay. So please speak up for yourself, whether in therapy or otherwise. And I know that's easier said than done. It's important.
This has been such a powerful and honest conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Laura Sgro, peoples, your transparency and your compassion and just your realness it's pretty special. So
Thank you
if
so
this
much.
episode resonated with you, if you know someone who is struggling with neurodivergence, ADHD, trauma, autism, all of these things, and the political climate, share
Mhm.
this episode and, give us a like, a review, rate us. It really does help more people find the podcast. If you're looking to connect with Laura, you can check out her work at your website, right? Which is,
Yes, ootwtherapy.com
yes, and it stands for
or
Out of the Woods Therapy, which I love.
yes. Yeah, yeah, I just rebranded this year, so, like,
Ooh.
month ago, so it's been really fun. You can also find me on Instagram at Out of the Woods with Laura and, probably other places on the internet too, so I welcome everyone into my little corner.
Okay, well, go check out what Laura has to offer, connect with her online, share with someone who needs it, keep showing up for yourself. And like I
Yes,
said earlier, remember, burnout is not your destiny. It's your wake up.
so powerful. Thank you for having me.
Been a pleasure.